friends. Welcome to episode 27 of the Way to Indiecast. On today's show, I'll be reviewing Amy, Asif Kapadia's new documentary about Amy Winehouse that chronicles the late jazz vocalist's life and career and examines the disastrous effect, fame, infamy, and the merciless paparazzi machine had on one of the greatest singers of our generation. That movie is rough. But also, we'll be discussing the ever-blurring line between movies and video games. As technology advances and video game storytelling continues to evolve and improve and mature, could we be looking at the future of cinematic storytelling? I don't know. We'll try to answer that question later on. All that, plus our indie pick of the week. Indie pick. There's only going to be one pick. And the show starts now. I'm your host, Bernard Boo, coming to you from the Bay Area in California, and joining me today to talk mostly about video games. That's why I brought him on. No other purpose for this guy. He's a very special guest. He's one of my dearest friends. He's making his second appearance on the Way to Indiecast. Ryan Clements, former writer at IGN.com, former host of one of the most successful video game podcasts of all time, Podcast Beyond, and a guy who is currently doing some great work in the games industry at a very large company that shall not be named.
For reasons unbeknownst to Bernard.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you for coming on, my friend. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much for having me again. It's good. I haven't talked to you in many moons.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time, like brunch today.
Yeah. We just got brunch.
It's hard to sound cool when you're like, hey, let's get brunch. Brunch isn't a very cool word, in my opinion.
No, like cool guys, hip guys don't do brunch.
They get like a drink, you know.
No,
like,
hip guys have breakfast at 3 p.m.
Breakfast or dinner. But I think as soon as you cross into brunch territory, then it's dangerous. Watch out.
Yeah, it's kind of like a prissy meal. It's the prissiest of all meals. But yeah, man, we've had a good time. We're recording this on 4th of July weekend, and just a couple days ago, we actually it was a rewatch for me, but together with our beautiful wives, we watched Ex Machina, one of my favorites of the year so far.
It was pretty good.
Yeah, man. So that was my second time watching it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Actually caught some things I didn't catch the first time. But what was it like watching it for the first time?
Well, as we discussed actually during the film, which is actually a big no-no. I shouldn't have opened my mouth during the film. But as we discussed, I had no idea what to think or feel during it. It does such a sublime job of putting you in these situations where you're not sure if it's comical or if you're supposed to be afraid or if you're supposed to be emotional and like kind of like sorrow. There's all these different warring emotions in that film that I really enjoyed. So I guess. And you said that it's really, you don't know where it's going to go next, and I think that was totally true.
Yeah, it's very cool. The first time I watched it, I had the same experience where the tone is kind of evasive and it's unpredictable. It's not chaotic at all. You just don't really know where the narrative is going, which is really great, especially now. I think that gets harder and harder to do as the art form gets older. And audiences become more familiar with it. But the cool thing about the second time watching it is that I kind of know all the moves now. Like I know where the narrative's going and how it's weaving in and out. And it's really great to see the great job Alex Garland and his team did. And that's a great tie-in because Alex Garland, the director of Ex Machina, he was basically, I don't know what to call it. There's not really he basically directed or was a consultant on the video game Enslaved, Odyssey to the West. It's a great game and very cinematic. He did a great job with the story in that game too.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is one game that's kind of on my list of shame that I never finished, so I need to go back and get to that as well.
Sadly, I think that's one game where no one would blame you for it because I think it's like woefully underappreciated.
It is underappreciated. It kind of snuck out there. I don't think people quite knew what it was all about or what the story it was trying to tell. And I'm also super into any stories that try and recreate that, Journey to the West, famous myth. And I don't know, is the origin Chinese or is it something else? I always forget the origin of that myth.
I don't
Or is
know.
it's South Asian? Well, maybe your listeners can write in and tell me how
Yes.
wrong I am.
But yeah, and also, that game starring Andy Serkis in a really great performance. I thought he did an amazing job.
He
Uh,
does great work, and he's
yeah.
done, a bunch of work in games, and his work is always fantastic. So, and somehow we got here from Ex Machina. So,
Yeah. Well, yeah, Alex Garland was the bridge between those. He did a great job with both of those projects. And now, before we move on, I've got to get to the first thing. First things first, indie pick of the week. My indie pick of the week is a movie called 10,000 Kilometers by Carlos Marquez Marcet. It's a terrifically acted love story set in the digital age that follows a couple jumping headlong into a long-distance relationship in which technology is the only tether between them. Sergei, played by David Verdaguer, I don't know how to say his
close
name.
enough.
Close enough. We'll see. Stays.
Sorry, David.
Yeah, sorry, David. But his character Sergei stays in the couple's apartment in Barcelona while his girlfriend Alex, played by Natalia Tena, moves to Los Angeles for a year to further her art career. And the film takes place entirely within Sergei and Alex's respective apartments in Spain and the United States. And we watch their Skype calls, we read their text messages, and watch one of them snoop around on Facebook. We see a lot of screens in this movie, but it doesn't come off as a gimmick or like a hollow device because we live in a digital age. So this is a pretty accurate representation of essentially what life is like when technology runs us in our lives so completely. It's an incredibly bittersweet movie, and I think it conveys perfectly how, despite all the different avenues of communication technology affords us, it actually amplifies the anxieties that come with geographical separation when you're in love with somebody. I spoke to Marquez Marcet in an interview that is up on the site right now. Please go check that out. And an interesting thing he brought up was how obsessive he is with sound design, which is something that wouldn't immediately strike you in this kind of movie because of the lo-fi nature of like the video chats and some of the other footage. He does some really inventive stuff, like when the connection gets lost on Skype, the sound will kind of cut in and out, and it creates this suspense. That's kind of really intense, especially when they're having hashing it out and having problems, and their connection is both literally and figuratively becoming dismantled.
Whoa.
It's a wonderful, wonderful movie, and I suggest everybody go check that out. And Ryan, you've gone through the long distance thing before.
I have. I think we have about 4 years of long distance relationship under our belt, and it is no fun. It is a challenge. But I'll tell you what, the thing that I always tell either my friends or even complete strangers on the street that have no interest, but I tell them that anybody can make a long distance relationship work as long as you are exceedingly patient and you have a lot of communication and a lot of trust between two people. And that's really those are the most important things that it takes. And I think people can make it happen. But I also think that our society is a pretty impatient one, and that's often why you see a lot of long distance relationships falter because of that, and because of that lack of physical connection is really tough to endure.
Yeah, but you and your lovely wife are a beautiful example of that. You guys can get through it. If you're going through a long-term or a long-distance relationship, it's definitely possible.
It's doable. It's possible.
Doable.
It's not fun. It's not like a good time, but you can make it work.
And it's worth it. It's worth it.
Absolutely.
That's my indie pick of the week, and that's the only pick because I wouldn't expect Ryan, who is in a completely different industry, to give an indie pick.
I wasn't prepared.
You're like, Jurassic Park?
Which I haven't seen.
Oh, okay. Even so, yeah. Yeah, that would have probably not turned out well if I were to force you to make an indie pick. But before we move on, I'm so excited to talk about our first subject, which is movies and video games and the convergence of those two mediums. We got to shout out our sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Mubi, a curated online cinema that brings its members a hand-picked selection of the best independent, international, and classic films. Every day, Mubi's curators introduce a new title, and you have 30 days to watch it. That means there are always 30 wonderful films to enjoy, all for only $4.99 a month. Plus, when you use their mobile apps, you can download films to watch offline, which is really cool. That's one of the coolest things to me. Mubi is your passport to the world of cinema, and it's available all over the world in over 200 countries. Now, Ryan, like we just said, we watched Ex Machina the other night, and I know that sometimes when you and I get together, it takes a really long time to decide.
We have the worst time. We're the worst at this.
Yeah,
we're
I think
so
it's
bad.
a common experience, though. I think a lot of people go through this, and with Mubi, you'll never have that problem because these guys and gals handpick these movies for you, because there are always 30 movies available. Every time a new one cycles in, which is every day, another movie cycles out. So there's like a bit of extra motivation to check out the films that are closer to leaving the lineup. And you don't have much time left to watch them. So that's really cool. A great movie available to watch right now on Mubi is Bong Joon-ho's classic 2006 creature feature, The Host, in which a tentacled monster emerges from the Han River and terrorizes the citizens of Seoul, South Korea. I love Bong Joon-ho, and this is one of my favorite movies of his because it's a monster movie that isn't driven by spectacle but by real emotion. Beautiful picture, and you can watch it on Mubi right now. And if you're saying, I don't have a Mubi account, we got you. We got your back. Way2 Indiecast listeners can try Mubi for free for a month. Just go to Mubi.com. That's MUBI.com/Way2Indie to redeem now. And a shout out to Mubi. We're so happy to have them on as a supporter. And please, guys, go support them as they are supporting us. Yeah. It's a really cool service. But now, gosh, with that behind us, all that remains is our exciting conversation about video games and movies. And Ryan, I know when we get together, I talk about this a lot. I bring it up a lot.
Yeah, and I don't know why we keep hanging out. All you do is talk about this.
That's all I do.
I kid.
Yeah, that's all I do. No, but I think it's really worthy of a deep discussion, because I think for the longest time, I've loved video games and movies my whole life. I can't remember a time where I wasn't playing video games or watching movies. Movies.
You're dedicated to your sponsor.
I love Mubi. But I love both mediums, but I think as far as storytelling goes, which is one thing video games can do amongst a lot of other things, video games just have never been to the level of movies as far as storytelling. Cinematically, in every aspect, I think movies are just, as a storytelling platform, have just cranked out better products than video games have. Not to say that video game stories are all bad or anything. They're just not to the level. But I think as time goes on, video game stories and storytelling has gotten better and better and better. Would you agree?
Yeah, well, also I want to, to an extent, I do want to say that it's an interesting comparison to make because film is such a mature medium compared to video games.
About 80 years on it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's not to say that video games have only been around for a couple years. I mean, actually, I was just looking this up, the arguments about when technically the first video game was. And I actually think that maybe Tennis for Two takes the cake over Space War, but I forgot, and I don't want to speak definitively, but they go back decades and decades. So it's really interesting when you think about that this medium, which is still very new, actually does have its roots now. But to your point, yeah, the comparing film and video games is really interesting because obviously video games, it almost part of its DNA is film. I mean, it's video and it's game. So it's, they're like distant cousins. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's always hard to compare the two because even though they're so similar, they're also so different. But I do agree with you that because film has so much maturity on its counterpart in video games, that's why you kind of saw like we're seeing it grow, but it's growing so fast.
Oh yeah.
And I think you can probably speak to that as to just in such a short time how especially some really, really talented storytellers in the video game industry have come forward and have hurdled the medium forward in that regard.
Yeah, I think for the longest time, what it was for me growing up was that with video games offered certain things like a sense of agency, a sense of accomplishment that the movies couldn't really offer in the same way. Interactivity, these things. But as far as storytelling, video games have always really just been inferior, especially when it comes to visual storytelling. I mean, they're just it's less than pedestrian for the longest time, I would say, as far as visual storytelling.
I would
Um,
I wouldn't this is where we may disagree a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily go that far in terms of story, like so far inferior. I think that it depends. But continue. I
yeah,
just
no,
wanted to
I mean,
interject.
yeah, I think that's the biggest area where we disagree or don't see it the same way. Yeah, I just think there are things that happen in cinema, like shots like. Like Citizen Orson Welles' deep focus shot in Citizen Kane that it conveys so much information so subtly, and captures so many complex emotions with just a shot, like just
Mm.
just a camera shot. I
But
don't think video games have ever, approached anything that subtle or complex as
if
far as
I
visuals.
Oh, sorry, Bernard. If I admitted that I never have not seen Citizen Kane, would I be immediately banned from this
No,
podcast?
no, 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 not at
I
all.
need to watch it. That's a huge hole in my knowledge of film and art.
Yeah, like there are some things that Orson Welles does there with his camera that I know that I haven't played every video game ever, but I've played the prominent ones that are known for their storytelling, and they don't even hold a candle. I mean, it's not, and I love video games. I'm not knocking them. It's
Sure.
just the truth, you know. It's
No, no,
it's
I understand.
but the thing is, here's where it gets interesting because that was what it was for the longest time. Like I was saying, like video games could offer these things, but it kind of sucked at visual storytelling. And movies had great visual storytelling, but obviously didn't have any interactivity involved or sense of accomplishment, stuff like that. But now, video games, as far as visual storytelling is concerned, are catching up. We talk about all the time the Naughty Dog's incredible game, The Last of Us, which is maybe my favorite game of all time. You if you watch footage from the God, I hate using this word, but cutscenes in in The Last of Us.
Your favorite.
Yeah, I just hate that term. The cutscene in The Last of Us, it's wonderful. There are subtleties there. For the first time, I think in a video game, I've seen facial like subtleties to these characters, these character models, where they show a range of emotion within just a couple seconds on their face without saying a word. And that's the first time I think I've seen video games do that as successfully as movies. You know what I
Mm.
mean?
Yeah.
They try to approximate it a lot of times, but you can always tell that it's not perfect. It doesn't work. But what they're doing there in The Last of Us's best scenes is essentially the same as what Pixar does in their movies. It's the same process. They're just computer generated characters playing out a scene, and they choose the shots or whatever.
Well, and I think it's important to note that when you take a human actor and you put them in a situation where I think it's actually Ninja Theory that often talks about full motion performance and full
Yes.
acting performance capture is when, you are filming an actor, you are filming their body, their face, and their voice simultaneously like a film would. You suddenly are creating and capturing everything that a film can capture. And so I think when video games do go that route, and I'm not saying they have to, but when that's what the creators decide, that's when I think you get that richness and human emotion that film does so well, and video games can also tap into that. And of course, The Last of Us does that beautifully well, and is kind of known for its motion capture performance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I think there are some games that are known for story that, like, one that would probably come up a lot is the Mass Effect series. I think
Mm-hmm.
people would mention that as being like, cinematic or approximating what movies can do. But I think actually, as far as visual storytelling, when you watch the story scenes in that movie, like, it is not convincing. Like, it does not, it does not look like these characters are actually interacting with each other or have like real emotion. The dialogue is great, the writing's good, but as I always say, that's only one aspect of movie making and cinema. There's so much else going on there besides the writing, and I think on those other fronts, games like Mass Effect just aren't up to snuff yet.
Well, you have to commend the team at BioWare for pushing in other ways in
Yes.
terms of
Yes.
in terms of branching storyline. Obviously, that being one of their strengths, and the ability for the Mass Effect series to take you in so many different directions. Everyone starts in the same spot roughly, but then everyone gets to a different spot in quite different ways. So I think that's kind of where, you have to make sacrifices sometimes when you're being that ambitious about certain things.
Right.
And that's kind of one of the unique, well, actually, no, it's not unique to games to have to make sacrifices, in some places to excel in other places. I guess that's probably true in film, huh?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I want to talk to you about this. Well, it's not going off script. It's part of the script.
Yeah.
There's no script.
No script.
The one thing I want to talk to you about, you keep talking about visual storytelling, which, is really, I agree, that's the most direct comparison between the two
Right.
mediums. But let's talk about the other types of storytelling that you get in games, which
Oh
really
yeah.
is non-existent
Oh yeah.
in film, and that's where I think games really have
That's the
something
cool stuff,
special to
right?
offer. Not only interactive storytelling in terms of players creating their own story. You could go. There's so many layers. Well, it'll take a minute to unpack it all, and we're not going to even get close. But there's things like players creating their own story with their imagination and being able to participate in the story. There's things like story that's predetermined, but forces the player to act it out.
Right. Right.
That can be really huge as well. The funny thing is, I often think about a let's say a interesting game called Gungrave. Did you ever play this?
I didn't.
So Gungrave was a really stylized action game. I think I want to say on PS2. But one of the earliest times when I remember, mild spoilers here for anyone that's going to go back and play Gungrave
No.
years ago. So mild spoilers here, but at the very end, your hero, your kind of I should say anti-hero, is a very dark character. Gets the bad guy. There's this climactic showdown, and at long last, your favorite word, cutscene. The cutscene is playing where you fought this tyrant of sorts. You've defeated him, and it's this fantastic shot of, if I remember correctly, it's a silhouette of this evil antagonist on his knees, defeated, and your character standing there with light, pouring in behind him, holding a gun to the guy's head, and it's precious seconds before I realized that it wasn't a cutscene anymore, and it was waiting for you, the player, to pull the trigger.
Right.
And I always remember that moment because that was one of the first kind of interactive story moments where literally the game has led up to a single firing of a bullet, and it put the control back into your hand. And it's really, it's chilling, it's powerful, it's stylish, and I think of that, even though that game might not stand the test of time. I think of that moment as kind of a turning point for me when I realized that putting control into someone else's hand during key story moments can elevate that moment beyond maybe what a film can do.
Absolutely.
Sorry, that was a long-winded story.
No, not at all. Not at all. I agree, and like The Last of Us is full of moments like that where you're presented with a scenario where you or your character who you're playing, Joel, must murder somebody who it's wrong. I'm not spoiling anything, but it's wrong to murder this person. But it doesn't just simply make you watch Joel do this. It has you control Joel and murder this person through Joel, which is a much more intense experience than in a movie. Not necessarily. It's not automatically, more intense or a richer experience, but the way Naughty Dog did it, I think, was incredible.
Oh yeah, and their masterclass. I mean, that team
They're ahead of the game, man.
They know what they're doing over there.
They're making movies. That's what I'm saying. I mean, they are making movies. Watch any cutscene from The Last of Us. Go on YouTube and tell me that isn't movie quality. There are subtleties in there. There are little twitches of the eye that mean the world, in there. And I'm really excited about the future of video game storytelling. And one of the things that I think has been pretty revolutionary recently, I think relatively recently, I think it's kind of evolved over time in video games, but is environmental storytelling. Games
Mm-hmm.
like Gone Home,
Mm-hmm.
a game in which you play this girl who returns home to her childhood house to find her family missing, and she must inspect the environment and look for clues, and the story emerges as you explore and you look through drawers and look up at the ceiling. This is something that movies simply can't touch, really.
Yeah. And by the way, Gone Home,
Ooh,
superb game.
ooh,
Fantastic game. Another game that, well, another story, I should say, where you don't quite know what's happening
yeah.
or what emotion you're supposed to feel. And I, little spoiler, was terrified most of the time because it really does set it up like a horror game, but that's not quite an accurate description. Let's just put it like that.
It's interesting. I think the great games journalist or former games journalist Adam Sessler, he played that game, and in his critique he said that he had the feeling that he wasn't supposed to be there.
Mm,
This kind of eerie feeling that you're in this house that you grew up in, but you're not welcome.
mm.
And that's an emotion that I don't. I mean, movies can convey that, of course, but this is really suspenseful the way the way Gone Home does. I don't. What studio made Gone Home? Do you remember?
The Fulbright Company. Let's just look that up because I want to do them justice
Yeah.
and make sure that I don't get that wrong. Fulbright. Just Fulbright. I guess it's not Fulbright Company. Designer Steve Gaynor and his team. Really excellent stuff there. Look it up.
Yeah, wonderful. Where everybody go play that game and play everybody out there play more video games. I mean, video games offer so many different kinds of experiences. It's not a single. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about video games is that they're kind of throwaway entertainment or mindless entertainment that is not art. That you don't get a deeper, I don't know. You don't take anything of value away from it that you could apply to the real world,
Mm.
which is totally untrue.
Yeah, and there's just so much. There's a video game for everyone is pretty much how it goes. I mean, just like films. There's very few people in the world. If you show me the whole spectrum of people in the world, there's very few of them will be like, I don't like movies. Like at all. Come on. There's got to be one movie that you like. You can't just dislike everything. And I think the same is true of games. Once people get over the fact that there's, a level of participation, I
Right.
bet you could find a video game for everybody. So go play video games is the point of this podcast.
Yeah, yeah. It's so broad the amount of experiences you can have. For example, like when you're talking about movies, the experience on a fundamental level is that you go, let's say the theater. You go walk into the theater, you sit down, room gets dark, and there's a bright image projected on the screen.
Yeah.
And then whatever happens from there is whatever happens from there, whether it's good or bad. But with video games, you could be, sitting on a couch with your controller. You could be in an arcade cabinet playing a racing game where your actual seat is moving around with you.
Yep.
You could be playing with that goddamn Wii where you're breaking your television, throwing the
Oh gosh.
controller at it.
Let's practice safe video gaming, everyone.
Safe video gaming, and we're entering a new era of video games in which you're putting on a little headset and stepping into another world in this sensory deprivation chamber. The Oculus Rift, Project Morpheus from Sony. I think Microsoft has their HoloLens, which is a hologram style of augmented reality, not virtual reality. It's just the Wild West right now in video games, and for this podcast, I think the focus here are the possibilities for storytelling. And what these things can mean for us. I think those virtual reality, you've tried out virtual reality more than I have, Ryan.
Mm. Yeah, actually, we didn't even talk about it today. I totally forgot that was one thing we didn't talk about more.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah. What were you gonna ask though? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, no. So since you've tried it, I mean, and you've gotten your hands on it and been in that space, what do you think the possibilities are as far as narrative?
Tremendous. And I don't think we didn't talk about this stuff before on your blog, on your podcast, right?
No.
Okay, because I didn't want to repeat. This is something I've talked about in other capacities. Sorry, my phone is going off. Goodness gracious, I'm such a popular guy, Bernard.
You are. You really are.
It's my mom. Okay. Okay. Here's what I was going to say. I've spoken about this in other forums, but I'll share this with your listeners as well, if permit me to repeat myself.
Sure.
But the most powerful thing about modern virtual reality and upcoming virtual reality things, including things like Project Morpheus, is that you don't really know this until you try it. But with convincing modern VR technology, it will begin to trick your mind. And it sounds deceptive, but it's actually quite beautiful in that your mind will start to assist in the process of bringing you into that virtual space because it's so convincing and it's so realistic. And that's kind of the all-consuming term called presence that a
Right.
lot of people in technology and in the VR space describe, where you're so thoroughly convinced that your mind starts to play a trick on you to the point of where, oh, I'm really here. This is real and it's happening. And my favorite example is hearing a lot of people that did a demo where there's like a long story, but there's a shootout going on, and you're hiding behind a desk with a virtual gun, and you're trying to protect yourself during the shootout. And I heard stories of a lot of people that had this demonstration. At the end of the demonstration, they literally stood up, and as they were done, they went to put the controller down on the desk and let it go. There's no desk there, so it fell on the ground, which is not good for the controller. But it can really start to put you in this space. And so now think about of any sort of storytelling, any sort of moment in time or in art where you could literally exist there. Well, literally is the wrong word because you're not, but your mind thinks as if you are literally there at that
Yes.
moment in time. Think about what kind of ramifications that can have on story and that can have on narrative. It's tremendous.
Oh gosh.
Then you are there in all these famous scenes. You are there in all these powerful, emotional, spectacular moments in time. And to me, that is one of the most exciting things about it is what is next? What can happen? What can creators do? And I think that's why a lot of people in the video game industry are looking to VR as one of the next big leaps in experimental storytelling.
Yeah, it's really exciting to me. I think about this almost every day. The possibilities that VR opens up for storytelling, because that's my interest. Video games don't only offer storytelling, but that's my
Sure.
interest primarily. And
Yeah.
one thing I was thinking about. Okay, so let's say. Let's talk about Pulp Fiction, right? Let's take that scene in Pulp Fiction where Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta are holding that guy at gunpoint in his apartment, right? And Sam is reading off his whole speech and everything.
Yeah. His
um,
whole thing, his whole
famous,
spiel.
yeah, famous spiel. So imagine with VR, you are plopped in a chair in that scene, uh, virtually. Okay, now at that point, I don't think, and this is almost semantics here, but I don't think it's cinema anymore because uh, you're not the director is not in control of what you see, right? Like you're as far as like things like composition
Sure.
and who you are looking at.
Sure. Sure.
With film you can control that, but here it's not that anymore. What it is, I think, is theater. Now,
Mm,
think about theater. When you go to the theater, it's the stage and this environment, and everyone's out in the crowd watching, like hundreds of people. Now,
yeah.
with VR, what's happening is if you're in that room in Pulp Fiction, it is a form of theater, except you're the only audience member.
That's really, really,
Think about that.
that's an excellent point. I really like, that's a fantastic way to liken it to, yeah, to traditional art. And I think yeah, there's no better way to put it.
Wonderful. It's I think that's a wonderful possibility. I hope these talented studios and developers give this concept a shot because I think it could be incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
If you're made to sit and be, your brain is tricked into thinking you're there. So the immersion is woo. It's like through the roof. Not that films and video games can be immersive without VR, but with this sensory, where it's tricking your mind. I mean, gosh, I can't even imagine how
Oh,
this will be.
Bernard, man, oh man. Did we talk about Kitchen? The Project
Yes.
Morpheus demo? Okay.
But tell
Terrifying.
listeners that's
Terrifying because it's basically like a short film or a short theater, if you will, where you wake up in an abandoned, dilapidated kitchen. There's blood everywhere. It's kind of assumed that you're some sort of police officer or detective because there's another detective in front of you collapsed and unconscious, and he slowly comes to and he's trying to loosen the binds around your hands, and events transpire that are deeply disturbing. There is another entity, this very very violent entity in this kitchen with you, takes the partner away. Partner is dead. And for a very long time, you are left alone in your bindings, just frantically looking around,
Oh
and
my
you're
God.
hearing steps behind you,
No.
and you're turning, and there's a lot. It's very dark, and you're literally looking over your shoulder, trying to find the source of the sound. And every time, of course, you look away, you're suddenly not looking in front of you at all the dark space in front of you, and it is my hands were drenched in sweat by the time this demo was over, and it's just such a great example of the kind of spaces that the creators can put you in at these moments. So in summary, not for the faint of heart.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd be able to take that, but like we said earlier, video games are a bit younger than film as an art form, as a storytelling medium specifically. But I think, the possibilities right now, and this is a big thing that people say at E3, yeah, like try to get Entertainment Expo every year. People say the possibility are endless.
And it's true though.
It's true. I'm really excited to see the new forms of storytelling that will be unlocked by video games. And yeah, I can't even wrap my head around how much is going to happen in the next 10 years or 20 years. But I think we touched on a few of the new ways that we're going to be experiencing stories through video games. Ryan, thank you so much again for coming to join me on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. You're most welcome.
Yeah, and we're gonna have you back also sometime soon because the last time you were on, we were talking about anime, and Ananda and I were in the process of being convinced that anime is cool, and
I'm
and
fighting for it.
and we watched a little bit more now, and we're gonna continue to watch more, and we're gonna have you back to update our thoughts on anime and talk a bit more about anime. But for now, thank you for this conversation. Where can we find you on Twitter?
You can find me at that there at Plum Cider, Pwam, and then cider, like the drink, all one word.
All one word, and
I
and
should
you'll
have I should have picked something easier to spell out.
no, it's the best, and I love the story behind that name, which we'll probably get into it on another episode.
Another day,
Yeah,
another day.
another day. But that's gonna do it for our discussion on video games. And without further ado, after a short break, I'll be back with my review of Amy.
How big do you think you're going to be?
I don't at all because my music is not on that scale. The music is not on that scale. Sometimes I wish it was, but I don't think I'm gonna be at all famous. I don't think I could handle it. I'd probably go mad, you know what I mean? I would go mad.
Celebrity is a monster whose mouth we as a people constantly push our fellow human beings into carelessly. The sharp teeth are the media, the paparazzi, vicious members of social media, and scavengers, distant relatives and old friends who will put on a fake face to get a free handout. Celebrity usually chews people up and spits them back out, like Britney Spears, Lindsay Lohan, Vanilla Ice. But sadly, some people get swallowed whole, and Asif Kapadia's Amy, an unsettling documentary about the jazz and pop vocalist Amy Winehouse, explores just how merciless the media monster can really be. I remember dancing in the clubs to Amy's biggest hits like Rehab, You Know I'm No Good, Back to Black. These were great pop songs, but I didn't know at the time when I was dancing back in 2007 that the lyrics to these catchy tunes were actually a cry for help from Amy. She was troubled. If you followed her success and her celebrity from a few years ago, you know that as the years progressed, she became more inebriated, lost a lot of weight, was doing drugs, drinking a lot. And I think in the public eye and on TV shows and stuff, on late night shows, everyone kind of looked at her as this sort of pathetic figure. Look at how bad she's fucking up. People would laugh at this. And it was easy to, I think, because she did some crazy stuff in public, like this concert in Serbia where she didn't sing at all and just walked out on stage drunk. Footage of that we see in Kapadia's movie. But now with that movie, it's revealed that she was really crying out for help. She needed help, and we didn't give it to her. Not only did we not give it to her, but her family members didn't give it to her. The movie interviews several of Winehouse's close friends, family members, in remembering exactly what happened in the case of Miss Winehouse, in that she was being watched almost 24/7, not just by her family and friends, but by us, and yet she didn't get the help that she needed to save her from her addiction. The movie not only uses performance footage, which is very important in this story that Kapadia is telling, but also footage from like friends' cell phones and home videos of Amy kind of more in her element, where she's more comfortable and she's not being barraged by flashing lights and people screaming her name. When we see her in these moments, she seems like a really smart girl, infinitely talented. She can play guitar. We already knew she had a great voice. The interviews with her friends and family are great because everyone agrees that she was just such a lovely and idiosyncratic person. Such a unique person. I think Yassine Bey, or Mos Def, appears here and says that he admits that he had a crush on her when he first met her because she's so magnetic. My favorite piece of footage in the movie is in a taxi cab filmed by her friend in the taxi across from her, and we see Amy, and in narration the friend tells us about how Amy could 1 second make you feel like you were the most important person in the world, and the next make you feel like you were nothing. And it's really chilling to see just how full-bodied this person was, this person that we all kind of made fun of and consumed her work, kind of used her up, each of us in our own way. Used her up, sadly, until she was gone. And it's nice to see that she was her own person, and not so nice to see that she was in such dire straits and yet got no help. One of the most controversial things about this movie is that her father, Mitch Winehouse, is shown kind of portrayed as not really giving her the necessary aid that she needed. For example, there's footage of her on vacation, Amy on vacation, and her dad, unbeknownst to her, brings a camera crew to film a documentary starring him about life as Amy Winehouse's father. He was clearly, as far as what we see in the movie, in the documentary, he was clearly exploiting his daughter. I don't know why. I'm sure he loved her as well. I don't know. A lot of people loved her. That much is clear. And yet, what we learn is that she got drunk and fucked up so much because she had no way of getting out of her media obligations. Sometimes she just didn't want to go on tour. She didn't feel healthy. She didn't feel mentally there. And yet her father and some of her agents were forcing her to go. They stuffed her on a plane and sent her to Serbia to perform in front of thousands of people. And that the resulting footage is of her on stage in front of those people with her back turned, not singing at all, wasted drunk, talking to her band members because she doesn't want to perform. We learn in the movie that she did this on purpose to free herself from the clutches of that media monster I was talking about. Sadly, we all know how it ended for Amy, but I think it's really useful and really important for people to take a look at this movie and really take a look at yourself. And do you find enjoyment out of seeing people, these celebrities suffer? Is it really worth it to ruin someone's life just so we can have a couple yucks at 12:30 at night during the late show or whatever? I don't think it's worth it. I think we have to really change our outlook on celebrity and our sensitivity towards these people and start treating them a little bit more like human beings. A cool thing about the movie is that it shows the lyrics of Amy's songs on screen as we hear the song, which is really cool because songs like Rehab, like I mentioned earlier, the lyrics to that song are very, very plain spoken. She is asking for help, or she's at least telling us that she was in a bad situation, bad experience, and, she doesn't really know how to help herself. I have an interview with Mr. Kapadia up on the site right now, which you should go and check out and read, because he tells me about how she really told her life story through her songs. If we wanted to, if we were listening a little bit more closely, we could have, really recognized what was going on there. When we see that footage in Serbia, when I first saw that footage, I thought it was really, I thought, oh gosh, what a sad state of affairs for Amy Winehouse. And that is true, but really, she was crying out for help. I keep saying that's the whole point of this movie. We need to listen to these people better and help lift them up instead of knocking them down. I don't see the virtue in that. I don't think it's very funny either when someone is in such big trouble as Amy was in. The only thing that I didn't enjoy about the movie, or I thought maybe was a little off base, was how it kind of portrayed Amy as a martyr, and almost in the way she's painted absolves her of a lot of the mistakes she made. She was a grown-ass woman, and she did, she was in charge of her life to at least a little bit of a degree, not her exterior life, of course. She was being thrown around like a rag doll. But, she was also culpable in this, although I think we're all culpable. As Ananda, who wrote the theatrical review for this movie, she put in her review, which you should read on the site. She loved the movie, as did I. But yeah, we're all culpable in this. We all had a hand in this, but Amy did too, and I don't think that that's communicated as well in this movie as maybe it should have been. It is a tragedy. It's a really stirring movie. The best thing about it is how uncomfortable it is, how it doesn't shy away from the ugly aspects of her death. I mean, the movie pretty much ends with her in a body bag. It doesn't really give you any sense of closure when you leave the theater. And that's a good thing, because this is not a happy story. Amy, by Asif Kapadia, is out in theaters tomorrow. Check it out. Let us know what you think. That's going to do it for the show. I'd like to thank Ryan Clements for being a guest and talking about movies and video games. I look forward to maybe talking more about video games in the future on this podcast, because I play a lot of video games. And I think that games are going to offer up countless new and exciting ways for storytellers to deliver stories to us visually. Like Ryan said, it is almost like a distant cousin or a close cousin to film. Video games are. So that was a great conversation. Thanks again to Ryan. Find him at Plum Cider on Twitter. Find me on Twitter at BJ_Boo. Follow Way Too Indie at Way Too Indie. Like us on Facebook. Follow us on Instagram and Spotify. And subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and YouTube. Check it out on YouTube. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you guys for joining me. We'll see you back here next week. Looking forward to it. Bye.